Notably missing from the talks in Ankara today is any representative from Syria itself. Now, within that country, the last remaining rebel group in the besieged area of Eastern Ghouta has begun leaving along with family members. Now, that is according to Syrian state TV. The Jais al-Islam group has not responded for our requests for any comment. Eastern Ghouta has been the target of a government offensive that has devastated the area. CNN's Frederick Pleitgen has had the rare opportunity to report to us live from Syria's capital, Damascus, close to Eastern Ghouta. And Fred, you've been in one of those internally displaced camps where people fleeing Eastern Ghouta have been sent. You've been speaking with children in those camps. What are they telling you?
Well, I think a lot of them, have been telling us, Lynda, that it was obviously terrible, especially in the last couple of weeks there in Eastern Ghouta. We have to keep in mind that this was a very large enclave that was held by opposition forces to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, some of these areas for well over 5 years. And, there was always a lot of heavy fighting going on, but it was never worse than in the past couple of weeks, I would say around the past months or so, when there was a huge government offensive going on. The children there, a lot of them were telling me, that they couldn't go outside, they couldn't play. One of the things that they also said is they hadn't actually been to school, many of them, for months. And clearly they were quite traumatized by many of the things that they witnessed. We saw some children who were getting a haircut, for instance, for the first time in many months, and many of them who were able to play outside for the first time in many months. So you had people who were quite relieved that they were finally out of the hell that was Eastern Ghouta. Many of them, of course, also still very much traumatized by many of the things that we witnessed. And, especially with the children that we saw, Lynda, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that the younger children, many of them, do not know anything except war. They were kids who were 5, 6, 7 years old, who were either too young to have realized the time that they were born when there was no war yet, or have just simply been at war for the entire times that they've been alive. So clearly these children have a lot of scars, and clearly aid organizations, if they do get access to them, there are some aid organizations that do, they're going to have a lot on their hands to try and deal with these psychological wounds, especially that many of these children, and many generally of the people there from Eastern Ghouta have endured.
Yeah, no doubt, Fred, a lot of trauma to work through. And I was reading that many of these families were unable to take anything apart from some basic necessities, some taking the keys to their home. Are many families hopeful that they will one day be able to return to Eastern Ghouta?
I think one day is probably the operative word there. I don't think that any of these families really know when they'll be able to return. There's places that I've been to in and around the Damascus area where it's taken a long time for families to be able to return after they've had to leave some of those areas. Now, there's other areas where it's different, like, for instance, in Aleppo, where some families are returning, but I don't think that the families that have left there are planning on returning anytime soon, or believe that it's going to be possible for them to return anytime soon. I think most of them will want to return there, but it's clearly not sure when exactly that is going to happen. And you're absolutely right. A lot of these people, they fled under fire. There was shooting going on. There were bombs being dropped as they were making their way out of these areas. It was a very, very dangerous thing. And of course, they could barely take any belongings with them. And so many of them have virtually nothing. And you saw that in those camps where, of course, they received some aid from international aid organizations, also from some local Syrian aid organizations as well. But they really do not have very much. And so many of them do want to return. But in many cases also, of course, we have to keep in mind that these areas were absolutely ravaged by the war that's been going on here in this country for so many years. So many of them clearly won't have very much to return to, Lynda.
Yeah, 7 years this war has been dragging on. We heard last week from U.S. President Trump that he's looking to withdraw the U.S. from this war. But this week it sounds like he hasn't spoken to the Pentagon about that, because it sounds like they might actually be increasing U.S. troop numbers.
Well, it's one of the interesting things when you look at some of the other nations that are also involved here in Syria. You look also at the Syrian government, some rebel groups as well. They all have a very hard time figuring out what exactly the United States strategy is in the long and medium term here in Syria. On the one hand, of course, you have the president who was saying that, yes, they want to pull out as fast as possible. That clearly alienated some of America's close allies in the fight against ISIS, like, for instance, those majority Kurdish groups, the Syrian Democratic Forces, who were clearly angry at the fact because they thought that America America would stand by their side even after ISIS is defeated. And then you have the Pentagon, which appears to be making other plans. So it's very difficult for international actors to find out what exactly America wants. And that certainly is also something that marginalizes the United States position here when it comes to negotiating the future of Syria, when it comes to negotiating what things are going to look like in the next couple of years. And so the countries that are really going into that void, if you will, are Russia, Iran, and Turkey. And we know that President Vladimir Putin of Russia is in Turkey, where he's going to be holding meetings with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, also with President of Iran as well, tomorrow, where they are essentially going to be speaking about the future of Syria without the United States at the table. To note that Syria is also not at the table as well. But clearly, as far as the outside powers are concerned, right now it's Russia, Iran, and Turkey that are very much calling the shots. We can see that on the ground here as well. There are still some rebel enclaves on the eastern outskirts of Damascus, and the ones who are leading the negotiations there for those rebels to essentially give up as well, it's the Russians. The U.S. Clearly does not have a role in this part of Syria and clearly is being marginalized in other parts of Syria as well, Lynda.
Frederick Pleitgen, great to have you there in Damascus, Syria, for that on-the-ground perspective there. Thank you very much.